Welcome to Payne on Politics, a podcast where host Dr. Gregory Payne of Emerson College sits down with fellow experts to discuss the current state of politics, public opinion, and global affairs. In a world growing increasingly complex, communication and critical thinking is key. This only makes the Emerson motto, expression necessary to evolution, more true.
Hello, I'm Gregory Payne, the Chair of Communication Studies at Emerson College, the first communication department in the United States, also co-director of the Emerson Blanquerna Global Center. And I'm here for Payne on Politics with a very dear friend, an alum of the Political Comm program. I could go on and on about the many careers, but when you're talking about someone who really is, in essence, the Renaissance man, I'm talking about Patrick Morris. So, Patrick, welcome home.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
My question to you, Patrick, first of all, you're in town. We met last night. You met with students who are interested in pre-law, which I have to say is the number one minor here at Emerson. You're now a lawyer. Before that, you've been in business. Mm-hmm. You've been in the oil business. You also have been involved in the entertainment business. Mm-hmm. You, of course, are specializing or got a specialist perspective in terms of politics. You're very good friends with Senator Gillibrand, who I met at your house. You have had a variety of careers, and you're still a very young man with two beautiful women, and we'll get back to the fact that I introduced you to your wife, but that's part of the Emerson, experience. What is it that has compelled you to have so many trajectories? When I asked you before about law, you said, I got tired of paying lawyers outrageous fees, so I just went to law school.
Point of clarification, the other beautiful girl in my life is my 4-year-old daughter, so that when my wife watches this, she doesn't think that there's another beautiful girl out there somewhere. I was basically in finance. I did the teaching scholarship here at Emerson, so was teaching a little bit, looking for something to do, wandered into finance, into the world of quantitative analytics, which was interesting, very interesting. I was a little early in that particular line of what would you call it, rational thought on how to value stock. Worked in finance for years, and then every other stop along the way, whether it was the oil business or the entertainment business or the banks I worked at or the fund that we had, it was all finance. Mm-hmm. And in that, you encounter an enormous number of attorneys. And if you want the truth of how I wound up in law school, I would constantly tell my wife how aggravated I was by the legal bills that we were paying for all of the entities. And I never felt we were getting a particularly high level of service. And I said, as a joke, over and over and over again, based on my experience, law school and the bar exam just can't be that difficult, based on whom I'm interacting with. And she told me around the birth of our son, you have to stop saying that unless you're going to go to law school, take the bar exam, and pass it.
So she challenged you.
It was a challenge, and she said, I'm telling you to go. Yes. So I went.
And?
I did very, very well in law school, and I passed the bar exam on the first attempt. So apparently it's not that difficult to do.
Well, as we know, John F. Kennedy Jr. did not. So you're ahead of the Kennedys there. What do you find interesting, Patrick, about law? Because I know you had an interesting case here, which we won't go into, but we've had such an interest among this generation of going into law school. What is it that you think Emerson can prepare people to do and be in terms of being effective as an attorney?
I don't know if it's my favorite part of the law currently, but we're in a new era where an enormous amount of effort is being put into stacking the bench with partisan judges, not all of whom are qualified, frankly. And I'm not going to pick on any particular judge, but if you're being chosen for your partisanship, for your ideological certainty and how you're going to apply it to the laws of the land, I'm not sure you're a great judge, period. Because we're supposed to look at the law, and we're supposed to take the facts before us, and we're supposed to make a reasonable and rationed decision. Voting, I'll take the Supreme Court, for example, voting the way they have on a woman's right to choose or on gun legislation seems not so much anchored in the United States Constitution as it is anchored in an idea of how they want America to be. I think we've gone through this before. Prior to Brown versus Board of Education, there were other cases which established different precedents as to how, we were to educate people. They were wrongly decided. They were wrong-headed decisions, and they were fixed by activist lawyers who went forth. I mean, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, a lot of attorneys who people have heard of in this generation, went forth and changed the law and changed the structure of the court. It became a much more liberal nation, really, at one point. Now we're moving in another direction. It appears we're getting much more conservative. And I think that for this generation, it's one of those times in history where the way we look at the law, the way we interpret the law, the way that we apply the law, it's becoming, legislating from the bench. And it's a way to change things immediately, much more quickly than people would think. One ruling can change the entire outcome for this nation. And so I think what I love about the law is it has, great practical appeal. And you can change things very dramatically, even with what seems a very simple case. Someone is going to bring a gun case to the Appellate Court of New York. And if they follow the Supreme Court's recent guidance, it's going to be very hard for me to see how gun legislation can survive in New York. It hasn't happened yet. I don't think the Appellate Court is wild about taking up the case, but it will come. And overnight, New York will change dramatically. Maybe for the worse. But, the job of attorneys is to take cases. Some of us take very simple cases, contract cases, business cases. Some people take white-collar defense. Some people take constitutional law. But I think it's a practical job. I find it a relatively, I'm not going to say it's a simple job. It has its own complexity. But it's very fulfilling. And it's got the other great, sort of element that you suddenly get paid for every single thing that you do by the hour at a very reasonable rate. So, provides a reasonable lifestyle too.
Right. Well, in terms of, as I said, you've had a very storied career. You've also been in the entertainment business, which of course is a piece of what Emerson in its communication focus is. What did you find interesting about entertainment, and how important do you think this mediated reality that's presented impacts in terms of decision-making in the U.S.?
Well, I think the media has always had an outsized impact on the U.S. I mean, if you think about the role of newspapers were vicious in England, and then in the early days of the Americas, essentially Boston newspapers fomented revolution. So media has always had a huge impact on this country. In today's world, the only thing that I would say, the ability to make outrageous, unsubstantiated claims anonymously and disseminate truly crackpot theories to enormous numbers of people, that's unprecedented. I don't care for the anonymity of it. I think if you write something and you believe it and you want to disseminate the message, you should be forced to put your name on it, because the world should know who you are if you're going to go and publish. And they should be able to check your sources. They should be able to check your credibility. They should be able to cross-reference against your other writings. That's something that I think we're missing. It's also something I think we could legislate constitutionally. The right to free speech is the right to free speech. The right to anonymous free speech does not exist in any document I've ever read.
So how do you think we get through this time, which of course many people would say is post-fact? You're an attorney, there are facts out there. How do we get back to more critical thinking, and maybe the news really is the news rather than propaganda venues?
So as long as you make your money getting advertisements, you have to send out messages which are appealing to an audience. If you want to do news, you're welcome to it. That exists today better than ever before. You can start your own news website as soon as you want. And you can go through and you can disseminate all the articles you want on whatever news stories you wish. And you can have extraordinarily high editorial standards. I don't know if you'll ever get paid to do it. The major networks would tell you you won't. That said, I think some people like Breitbart and others have tried to start independent news agencies, which are pretty credible. How do we change it? How do we fix it? I don't think we do. I think if the audience wants it, it will be presented. If they pay for it, if the Johnson & Johnsons and Pfizer's, I don't want to pick on just big companies in the drug space, but as long as large corporate commercial dollars are going to partisan type of press, that voice is going to stay, and it's going to be widely disseminated because it's paid for.
So in essence, the critical thinking of the audience is crucial. One question I was going to ask you is, you've had an incredible career. Your family are very happy to say good friends of your parents. You've got 2 beautiful kids. Your family is one of philanthropy. I've been to many of the events down in D.C. And New York, mostly New York, where, of course, theater, etc. Your family has been very good. Elmira College, your father was the head of the board of trustees. I know also in Albany and other places. It is somewhat of, I think, a American success story. What is it about the Morse family in terms of giving back? Because you've given back to Emerson. We hope you continue to give. But tell us about your view in terms of giving back.
Just a quick correction so that nobody in Albany gets upset. It was the University of Buffalo.
Buffalo, yes.
Yeah,
okay.
Which essentially is run out of Albany. But
I should have realized because we went to see the Buffalo Bills play.
He didn't give any money to Albany, so I don't want Albany alumni to get all upset about that. I don't know if it comes from anywhere in particular. I think that, when you have any human compassion at all, it can be very hard to... I'll state it this way. If you feel that you have some excess that you really are finding nothing else to do with other than buy yourself another pair of shoes, another watch, another car, there's a lot of problems in the world that can be at least partially solved for some time with even a little bit of money. And it just feels good. It feels like the right thing to do. And it doesn't have to be a lot. It can be $1. I've said this over and over and over again. I think every alumni of Emerson should give $1 a month. It shows that you support the institution. It's sure not going to, quote, matter, all those other things. No, $1 doesn't matter. But if 60,000 alum give $1 a month, that's $60,000 a month. That certainly pays quite a few bills. So, and it feels good because you can come back and you can say, oh, this $1 a month fund is paying for this professor, this seat, Dr. Payne's endowed chair of communications. We can pay for that. There's lots of things we can do with $1 a month from our alumni. So I don't think it comes from anywhere special. I think a lot of people are very generous. It's a wonderful human trait, and I think it's shared by almost everyone.
The one thing I would say is, as you said, your family's been very kind to myself and my sister Janice when she was running her particular program. And one example of that is the Rosarito program that I founded back in 2008. Family has given at least 8 or 9 different scholarships so that students who could not go financially were able to go. And you've been very, very, I would say, under the radar on that. But one person in particular that I have to say thank you about is you did have your mother who was a trustee at Lake Erie. Yes. And she had a friend there who said, we've got this young, very talented wrestler who's won championships, is an All-American wrestler, and we think he would help him get out of the Midwest and out of sort of that Ohio view by having him go to Rosarito. So I'm mentioning Shepard Vargo, who you know, who, of course, for people at Emerson listening to this, Shepard has eventually come back. He's the administrative associate who does so much more. He works 24/7. And he's somebody who did gain a very, very important global perspective. I remember talking to Carol, and she said, I understand he went to Chile with you on the State Department visit. So when you see Shepard, and you met with him last night, what does it mean when you see somebody who was somewhat, very successful at Lake Erie, but now has this global diplomatic perspective, graduated from Blanquerna, our sister school, and kind of epitomizes what an Emersonian is today?
Well, I think it's amazing. I think it's wonderful. I think you have to give the individual all the credit. Opening up a door doesn't mean anything if the person doesn't walk through it. So Shepard ran through the door and continues to run. And that's and certainly not everyone that receives a scholarship does as well as he has. But it's on the individual, and that's one of the things that I've always found to be a little challenging is when people want to be too focused on exactly how money is used. I don't mind directed gifts. I think they're wonderful. Direct it where you think you want it. But don't try to overmanage the situation, because you never know who's going to be the star, right? If I gave everybody that I met for the next hour some amount of funding, some amount of money, some people will do absolutely nothing with it. Some people will save it and maybe it helps them in the future. Somebody may start the next, I don't think I'm going to give them that kind of money, but they could start their own company. They could do something spectacular. They could take a trip that changes their life. You don't know. So it comes down to providing some opportunities, opening some doors, and people will run through them or they won't. And it's not even to judge them. If you receive an opportunity, I suggest you make the most of it, but, I don't hold it against you if you don't. Everybody comes from a different place, a different headspace. Everybody has their own challenges, their own problems, and, their own victories. And you don't get to necessarily share in all of those, and you don't have to. You give because you want to, and you hope people make the most of it. And somebody like Shepard has, so he's done an amazing
We're very
job.
proud of that. As I said, very appreciative. The Center for Global Communication honored Bob and Carol with the Robert F. Kennedy Award a few years ago. We had a wonderful dinner at Blue. If I could shift a bit, you were part of what I would call kind of a golden group of kids in the 90s when we had the decade of distinction within the department. And you traveled and you met, of course, iconic Judy Trent, who was a political guru. Can you sort of pick your favorite experience when you were, more or less roaming the halls of 21 Commonwealth and some of the trips to New Hampshire and other places we went?
The New Hampshire primary, and I for the life of me, I can't remember when that was. That had to have been in the winter of 96? I can't even remember.
Yeah, I think 96.
Yeah, it had to be the winter of 96. And going up to New Hampshire, and first we tried to do a surreptitious poll during a speech at a private facility, and we all got kicked out, and that was fun. This
was prior to Spencer Kimball.
Prior to Spencer. I didn't manage to get any interesting data out of getting kicked out, but the hotel was full of all of the National Press Corps who I'd seen on TV, and I learned a few things. One, at least back then, traveling the campaign trail was a lot about drinking beer by the press. Of course, we were stone cold sober. We would never do that while we were on a school finance trip. But it was just interesting actually interacting with them and getting a sense of their actual humanity and what they were doing out there, and why it was important to them to be in New Hampshire and to keep doing this year after year after year. I watched Steve Forbes stumble out of his campaign bus. He tripped on his way out of the bus. That was somewhat humorous too, but yeah, that was a defining moment, because it only comes up every once in a while. I don't think most people in the world will have ever experienced the New Hampshire primary. I've yet to do an Iowa caucus, but the New Hampshire
if there is going to be one.
If there is going to be one, yeah.
I remember calling you all, and of course I think this is really the immersive relationship, because on one hand Judy wanted these forms filled out, but I remember you were talking, I think, with the likes of Tim Russert and having a great time. I think there was a part of me going, well, gee, I should have been there. I think Tita Poplar, who was your colleague at the time, was David Bloom, who was an NBC reporter. And then Bob Nafee, who comes to us from California. I must ask, do you know what Nafee is doing these days?
I think he was involved in something in the tech world for a while, and I've totally lost. I touched base with him once a few years ago. Lisa Beyer touched base a few years ago. We haven't stayed terribly close. I miss them. It would have been nicer if we had spent a little more time together, but I don't really know now. Well,
I think what we have to do is get that group together. I know that, of course, you met up at the Global Summit in D.C. with Bob Woodward. You met up with Scott Ratson. Of course,
Well, Bob's getting sued today, right?
Who is this?
Bob Woodward is getting sued today.
He's getting sued by
Donald Trump for $50 million for releasing the tapes.
Right. Well, we thought that there might be a little newsworthiness. My question to you, that summit was something that I have to say, having been involved in that, and Shepard was crucial in that, along with Spencer and Linda Peak Shack, Susan Del Percio. That was really a highlight. I think it's the best event I've seen Emerson do. As an alum, you seemed very excited to be there, and you had a good conversation with Bob Woodward. Those types of events, how important do you think they are with regard to Emerson brand, especially as we welcome in President Bernhardt?
Oh, I think they're invaluable. I mean, you're reaching outside of the community, you're reaching into a large metropolitan area, you're doing something timely with a person who, I hope Bob's with us for a long time, but it's getting to be the end of the generation. So connecting with people who help us bridge that gap over time, I think is wonderful. He was lovely, absolutely lovely. He's excellent, as a speaker, as a journalist, as just a sort of model American, I have to say. He's great. But I think that the Emerson brand can project all across the globe, as you do with Barcelona, as you do, or as you've done in the past. I know I went to Saudi with you. I think it's incredibly important. We're a communication school, for God's sakes. We need to communicate. I
mean, I have to ask you, you were there in the VIP area when we had two students, journalism students, interviewing Woodward. What was your thoughts then? What do you think was going through their mind? Because I don't think initially they really realized who they were interviewing.
It's difficult at times because, you're thrust into a very... I don't think they realize the intensity of the situation in advance either. Any young person who's put across the chair from one of the great journalists of all times and told interview this person, it's a hot seat. They're professional journalists who wouldn't necessarily want to be interviewing Bob Woodward. He's quite mentally agile. He can outrun you when he wants to. But, preparation is a big part of doing an interview. And the only thing that I would remind everyone of is do try to be prepared and try to know the subject. If you notice, all the great interviewers of all the past 50 years, anybody we would remember, whether it's Merv Griffin or I'll even say Geraldo Rivera wasn't that bad at it, though I'm not a huge fan. If you're going to be tasked with speaking to people, I think you have to connect with who they are long before you get in front of them. And then the job of the interview is to try to break through the image, get down again to the humanity of the individual, and to try to pull a few new tidbits out. The past is prologue. You're with them right there in the room, but you need to know all of that. If you haven't read in, it can be difficult. So I would just encourage everybody to do a lot of research if they get called up to do that kind of job.
Well, I know a couple of friends of mine over at the Kennedy School said, my gosh, this was incredible that Emerson was able to get two students to do that. But I know in planning it, we wanted to make sure, yes, it's good to have people like you who've been givers to the college. You, of course, had Al Jaffe, Pat Payton, who are trustees. But we thought this next generation, this could be a nice, propelling forward. You mentioned Saudi Arabia. Of course, we were the first group to take students as well as Westerners after 9/11. What was your impression at the time? Because you and Kate went, we were there for the wedding, of course, Prince Faisal, I think the second one. So your thoughts, and where do you see Saudi going? Because we're trying to put together another trip of Emerson students.
Well, it is a very foreign experience. It comes with a lot of, at least even back then, I guess it did, it comes with a lot of mental baggage. You're told all these mysterious things. It's a sort of hidden kingdom that's opening up now. It's much more accessible now than it was then. So you're flying across the world into desert. We flew Saudi Arabian, which had the most, it's lean, at the time. Because, they don't serve drinks. Americans like to have drinks. They do serve food, but the entertainment was quite an entertainment selection. But it wound up being the most comfortable flight of my life because we had a 747 to ourselves, which was lovely. That's never happened to me before. you learn a lot. I don't even know how to describe it really so much. You visit various culturally significant locations. You learn things. You hear things that you would find incredibly familiar, and then there are experiences that they had there that I've very unfamiliar experiences. Their corporal and capital punishment system and how it was undertaken at the time was not something that I would naturally be. I was out of my comfort zone, let's put it that way. You go to a Saudi, you have to be prepared to get out of your comfort zone, and you have to be prepared to accept what you receive from them and try your best to be a diplomat, and a diplomat from a friendly diplomat. You're not there to change it, you're there to observe it. If you want to start making grand social proclamations about what should change in the world first, as just like a reporter, you have to learn all about it before you make comments about how to change it. So,
I was going to think one thing that was clear that I talked about it. We had more time on our hands. Mayo might go to the wedding. It was a wedding, and we had we were doing with the cousin. Is the words of cultural competence, and to realize that, as you said, listen, watch, and try to come back to better understanding. Gears. I know you got back home to that beautiful of Kate, also your two kids. One person and one thing that you've always done in the family is you've been the essence of what Emerson Mafia is all about, but I think the same thing your colleague at Syracuse. You've been very good with Syracuse. You have a connection, of course, with Senator Gillibrand. And I know we talked about potentially having CPL students come and meet. What is it about the Senate that really change agents most about the relationship?
Her record in the Senate is pretty spectacular. She goes to Washington, actually gets things done without what I'll call forced time. She has an agenda. It's one that I happen to connect with. But I think her most charming characteristic is, from this, we used to call them blue dog number. She's a deal maker, and a good one. She fights for things that I be fighting for. Fights for the rights. She fights for education, infrastructure. She fights for good projects, and she does not lay down under what could be the pressure of the. But she's also effective, which means bridging red-blue is not something we thought about. And what's really shameful about politics are presented, things getting done. And if we look and we ask ourselves, are things still getting done? We're so partisan. We're told that if you have to sit on this side and you sit on this side, and you should never cross the river Styx. To cross it is back again. I don't think that's the way she does it. I'll admit that the Senate throughout its entire history has been a more moderating on American politics. The partisan fights down in the House, but it gets hot up in the Senate too, and I think she's at being active at a time when we don't really hear that.
Well, what I would say, Patrick, is it's always great to chat with you. I know that we talked, said you have another venture. You're thinking of as a European country that you're going to, and another degree you might be going after. Can you share that?
I'm toying with the idea of a PhD in law, and I'm toying with the idea in Europe. And my favorite country on the planet, which is Denmark. I think for anyone that wants to get a true change of course as to whether or not pure capitalism to go, for people scared of the word socialism, they need to go to Denmark and realize that that's a country that changed its mind in the middle of the 20th century about how they wanted their culture to perform. And what I mean by that is the way they decided to honor the human being through fairness, through sharing of resources. And I think it's an amazing success model, and one that we don't hear much about. The scary side of socialism, which it's communism, it's fascism, it's take everything away from you, tax you to death. Maybe the taxes are high, sure, I'll spot you that. But if you don't have to worry about paying for education, if you don't have to worry about paying for healthcare, if you don't have to worry about funding your retirement, if you don't have all those things to worry about, if the real estate market is more of a controlled capital appreciation model instead of runaway capitalism where whatever number you can get is great, it's a different way of looking at a modern, sophisticated, highly educated economy where they'll be the first to admit that they can't be number one in anything. They're not big enough. So they've decided to be pretty darn good at a lot of things, but they really focus on art and design and intellectual endeavors in a way it's very different, and it's a very interesting experiment, and one that I hope continues, and I hope they don't fall for the trap of lower taxes and less humanity. I think we can learn a lot from it there, and I'd like the ability to spend some time there. As an American, it is very hard to move there unless you can find a reason to be there that they approve of, and taking a doctoral degree is one of those reasons, and it's in an area that I quite enjoy, and I have my little thesis sketched out already, so hopefully they'll accept me.
Well, someone that has been a part of my life since you were here has been you as well as your family. And I think that if you're in Denmark, undoubtedly they'll be knocking at your door saying, Copenhagen, here I am, and if that's where you're going to be. Patrick, we are immensely proud of all that you do. We are immensely proud of all that you and Kate and the two kids and Bob and Carol, as well as your brother, what you've done in terms of supporting Emerson, but more importantly, young people with the dream. So with your help and inspiration, I think more people have been able to do that. Thank you. And I will say, I think that President Bernhard, as well as a new group coming in, is going to be knocking at your door, because you've been one of the most important, consistent, and I think giving people within the Emerson Mafia. Thank you for being on Pain and Politics.
Oh, thank you.
Look forward to seeing you in New York.
Look forward to seeing you in New York.
All right. Take care.
All right. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.